by selling his labor power, and he must do so under the present system. The working man makes over to the capitalist the consumption of that power, but within certain rational limits. He sells his laboring power in order to maintain it, apart from its natural wear and tear, but not to destroy it. In selling his labor power at its daily or weekly value, it is understood that in 1 day or 1 week, that laboring power shall not be submitted to 2 days or 2 weeks of waste or wear and tear. Take a machine worth 1,000 pounds. If it is used up in 10 years, it will add to the value of commodities in whose production it assists 100 pounds yearly. If it is used up in 5 years, it will add 200 pounds yearly, or the value of its annual wear and tear is in inverse ratio to the quickness with which it is consumed. But this distinguishes the working man from the machine. Machinery does not wear out exactly in the same ratio in which it is used. Man, on the contrary, decays in a greater ratio than would be visible from the mere numerical addition of work. In their attempts at reducing the working day to its former rational dimensions, or where they cannot enforce a legal fixation or normal working day, at checking overwork by a rise of wages, a rise in the proportion to the surplus time exacted, but in greater proportion, the working men fulfill only a duty to themselves and their race. They only set limits to the tyrannical usurpations of capital. Time is the room of human development. A man who has no free time to dispose of, whose whole lifetime, apart from the mere physical interruptions by sleep, meals, and so forth, is absorbed by his labor for the capitalist, is less than a beast of burden. He is a mere machine for producing foreign wealth, broken in body and brutalized in mind. Yet the whole history of modern industry shows that capital, if not checked, will recklessly and ruthlessly work to cast down the whole working class to this utmost state of degradation. In prolonging the working day, the capitalist may pay higher wages and still lower the value of labor, if the rise of wages does not correspond to the greater amount of labor extracted, and the quicker the decay of the laboring power thus caused. This may be done in another way. Your middle-class statisticians will tell you, for instance, that the average wages of factory families in Lancashire has risen. They forget that instead of the labor of the man, the head of the family, his wife and perhaps 3 or 4 children are now thrown under the juggernaut wheels of capital, and that the rise of the aggregate wages does not correspond to the aggregate surplus value extracted from the family. Even with given limits of the working day, such as they now exist in all branches of industry subjected to the factory laws, a rise of wages may become necessary, if only to keep up with the old standard value of labor. By increasing the intensity of labor, a man may be made to expend as much vital force in 1 hour as he formerly did in 2. This has, to a certain degree, been affected in trades placed under the Factory Acts by the acceleration of machinery and the greater number of working machines which a single individual has now to superintend. If the increase in the intensity of labor, or the mass of labor spent in an hour, keeps some fair proportion to the decrease in the extent of the working day, the working man will still be the winner. If this limit is overshot, he loses in one form what he has gained in the other. And 10 hours of labor may then become as ruinous as 12 hours were before. In checking this tendency of capital, by struggling for a rise of wages corresponding to the rising intensity of labor, the working man only resists the depreciation of his labor and the deterioration of his race. All of you know that from reasons I have now to explain, capitalistic production moves through certain periodical cycles. It moves through a state of quiescence, growing animation, prosperity, overtrade, crisis, and stagnation. The market prices of commodities and the market rates of profit follow these phases, now sinking below their averages, now rising above them. Considering the whole cycle, you will find that one deviation of the market price being compensated by the other, and that taking the average of the cycle, the market prices of commodities are regulated by their values. Well, during the phases of sinking market prices and phases of crisis and stagnation, the working man, if not thrown out of employment altogether, is sure to have his wages lowered. Not to be defrauded, he must, even with such a fall in market prices, debate with the capitalist in what proportional degree a fall of wages has become necessary. If, during the phases of prosperity, when extra profits are made, he did not battle for a rise of wages, he would, taking the average of one industrial cycle, not even receive his average wages or the value of his labor. It is the utmost height of folly to demand that while his wages are necessarily affected by adverse phases of the cycle, he should exclude himself from compensation during the prosperous phases of the cycle. Generally, the values of all commodities are only realized by the compensation of the continuously changing market prices, springing from the continuous fluctuations of supply and demand. On the basis of the present system, labor is only a commodity like the others. It must, therefore, pass through the same fluctuations to fetch an average price corresponding to its value. It would be absurd to treat it on the one hand as a commodity, and to want, on the other hand, to exempt it from the laws which regulate the prices of commodities. The slave receives a permanent and fixed amount of maintenance. The wage laborer does not. He must try to get a rise of wages in one instance, if only to compensate for a fall of wages in the other. If he resigned himself to accept the will, the dictates of the capitalist as a permanent economical law, he would share in all the miseries of the slave without the security of the slave. In all cases I have considered, and they form 99 out of 100, you have seen that a struggle for a rise of wages follows only in the track of previous changes, and it is the necessary offspring of previous changes in the amount of production, the productive powers of labor. the value of labor, the value of money, the extent or intensity of labor extracted, the fluctuation of market prices, dependent upon the fluctuations of demand and supply, and consistent with the different phases of the industrial cycle. In one word, as reactions of labor against the previous action of capital. By treating the struggle for a rise of wages independently of all these circumstances, by looking only upon the change of wages and overlooking all other changes from which they emanate, you proceed from a false premise in order to arrive at false conclusions.